I love that there's some data nerds in here. Can everyone hear me okay? I can't see you guys, so just put it in the chat or yell at me or something. Um, but my name's AJ. I'm very excited to be here. I am the owner of Greer Research and Consulting LLC. And I'm a huge data nerd, like a massive data nerd. And since this is such a small group, I would love for you guys to be interactive, and I would also love for you guys to yell at me if I talk too fast, because that is a recurring problem. So, with my LLC, I primarily focus on research, which is just pretty much data, and then I do a lot of criminal justice consulting work. So, my specialty is actually in sex offender behavior. I have a master's in forensic psychology where I went through that specialization. I've worked for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and we'll get into the background I have with all of the nonprofit and data work that I've done. So, today we're talking about the importance of data collection and analysis for nonprofits. And we're going to see if this goes to the next slide or if it just gets mad. Okay, perfect. So this is our focus for today. What is data? Why it matters? Why you should prioritize it? Practical strategies. You can read all of that. I will say these slides have a lot of information on them. I'm not going to read them verbatim, but I will send them out to whoever wants them because they have a lot of information and not all of it can be memorized very easily. I got overly excited making this, and this ended up being 120 slides at one point, but I whittled it down so it's a reasonable amount. Whoever just laughed, I respect that because I also laughed. So this is my nonprofit and data history. I've been doing nonprofit work since I was 17. So I started off doing a lot of animal rescue. I worked over at Wood Green Animal Charity over in England for a little while. And then I worked around rural Texas. If anyone's familiar with the Conference on Crimes Against Women, I worked on their rural project. So I went out, worked with various teams on implementing systems change for responding to domestic violence. I worked as the training coordinator for Texas Advocacy Project. I worked with Kelsey McKay at Respond Against Violence. National Coalition for Sexual Freedom. I actively work with them now. And then I was a research specialist for TDCJ. I did the CGIS policy for, I think, the first round of Safe Systems. I did data and evaluations for conferences. The Albuquerque SANE Collaborative Conference was the most recent. And now I'm a supervised monitor and work in their CRM system and their data, as well as monitoring, sex offenders, domestic violence offenders, and then run my own consulting company. So, really lengthy background in everything that is nonprofit and data related. And as soon as I got into this, immediately I wanted to like get a hold of the data. I've all of my background's in psychology. I wanted to know more about violent crime. So I started looking at what was going on in the background of all of these different places because they're not super standardized. And I've got good news and I have bad news. So if I can get the slide to change. So the good news is if you're working at a nonprofit now, you already have a lot of data, and that's great. I always think you should have more data. The bad news is it's probably scattered all over the place. It's probably not formalized, and it's probably bits and pieces in places where you can't always find it, and so it's not being utilized to its fullest potential. Who in here has that problem? I'm just going to assume people are nodding their head yes or no. So the ones I've worked at, while they have a lot of data and they collect a lot of things, they only tend to pull it to use it towards grants, which is great. That's what you need that for. But there's so much more you can do with it. So there's a lot of struggles and gaps. Nonprofits are understaffed. We all know that. Underfunded, no timed. There's no like data nerd. Every time I bring up I'm a data nerd to people when I'm working in nonprofit or consulting with a nonprofit, they're like, "Oh, that's so interesting. I don't know what to do with data." So it's nice to be in a room full of data nerds. There's also a lot of unused data, which drives me crazy. Or it's unorganized, or they're unsure what data would be beneficial, or data can appear very boring. But I'm going to teach you how to make it exciting because who doesn't want to learn how to make data exciting at 11:30 a.m. on a Thursday? Because it's really just storytelling. It's the story of whatever your nonprofit's mission is. It's collaborating with inside your agency as well as collaborating outside your agency. It's a lot of curiosity. Data is just a way to explore and gain knowledge and do all of the things you want to do if you're a curious person. And then there's foundational patterns for change. So when you are picking up on those data patterns and you're looking and you're analyzing, even the smallest amount, you can pick up on a little pattern and think, oh, this might be a useful change. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then organizational confidence building. When you have something that is concrete, found in evidence-based information and in data, it's a lot easier to get funding. It's a lot easier to be more confident in what you're saying because you have this stuff to back it up. And we know that especially if, like, when I'm doing criminal justice type things, a lot of times there's not a link between like what's going on in the academic world with their data and what field practitioners are doing. So there's that missing link there. But if they have the data, great, now they have something to really stand on. So the practical portion of data is it's for funder reports, it's for grant reports. Who in here enjoys writing grant reports? I want to know who is a masochist. Anyone? Because I hate writing them. I'm not a huge fan. I'll do it, but I'd rather not. Um, it also shows the success of your programs. It can ensure future funding, examine financial well-being, shows who you're reaching, and it can guide you into developing new programs. So my biggest thing with the data is I want the programs to be improved. I want them to be more useful, and I want them to be the absolute best that they can. Or if they're not working, figure out how they can change it, or if they should introduce it something new. And everything in the world is a data point. Words are a data point. Text is a data point. Numbers, images, the temperature in November, or I guess we're in February now. No, we're not in February. We're in January. Colors. Everything is technically a data point. So, like when I'm looking around and I'm looking around at my room and I'm like, okay, I have a shelf over there. I have a cat back here. That tells you, okay, I have a lot of books and I love my cat. There you go. That's your quick data analysis on my personality. And that's like a very, very surface level example, but that's kind of how you start collecting those data points. And it's gonna look different based on your industry. Are you guys comfortable sharing what kind of nonprofits you work with or consult with? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Small, medium
Yeah,
nonprofits
this is
in the
Bob
industry.
Novello. My business consults with all kinds of nonprofits, from very small to very large to just starting. Folks interested in starting nonprofits. It just varies all over the place.
Okay, okay, interesting. And a lot of education base I see in the chat and okay, that's good because this presentation I've tried to keep it as vague as possible as well as recommendations for small to medium to larger nonprofits. Um, and I'll circle back because I'm really curious how some of the nonprofits you guys are working with, how they're collecting data to begin with. Because what they're collecting versus what I was collecting for, advocacy and domestic violence and sexual violence is going to look different than someone who's working in education based or someone who's working in environment. But in general, most nonprofits keep data related to donors, clients, especially if it's a human services or healthcare nonprofit, marketing, so they can have campaigns and emails, financial, the grant stuff, and then keeping program data depending on what kind of programs they're running. Um, Bob, you said that you work with a lot of startups. How are they starting with their data? Do they even worry about it when they start off, or what's
No,
their
no, I
plan?
don't think they do. I don't think they even understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing. I think most people immediately, when you ask them, okay, what kind of data either are you capturing or do you want to capture, they'll zero in on donors, they'll zero in on their finances, things like the basic things that you'd expect them to say, okay, we need to track that kind of data. That's pretty much it. I don't think they're very knowledgeable about what it is they need to go after. And,
Hmm.
and that's kind of why this particular workshop is really important for people to see because there's so many things you need to be tracking.
Oh, yes. And
Mhm.
I have a good thing that you can take back to them and be like, here's a good starting point for you. So let's talk about some data types. So the way I address data might look different than other presentations that you've seen. I am a researcher. That is my life's blood. I love research. So when I'm looking at data, I am looking at quantitative versus qualitative data. Um, Most startup nonprofits are going so fast they don't even know what data they are supposed to collect. Oh, that makes me nervous because that's how nonprofits either fail or they're not able to keep up. And I really would like that not to happen. Um, but this is kind of a good starting point for them, and I feel like it's straightforward enough that it can give them somewhere to go. So we have our quantitative data, and that's the what and how many. That is things that are in numbers. So you have age, you have income levels, you have certain survey responses. So if you have like a scale of like rate this class 1 to 5, donation size, height, anything that is a numerical value. That can be broken down more, but for purposes of this particular training, I'm not going to confuse you guys like that because that's evil. Um, and then we have qualitative. I'm a qualitative researcher. I can do quantitative and I do mixed, but I prefer qualitative because I think that is much better specifically for nonprofits because a lot of nonprofits are grassroots and they're active in the community and they're getting feedback from the community. So that's your narrative data, your case studies, success stories, which grant funding loves success stories, so that's a good way to get them buy-in for qualitative data. I just think qualitative data is also more interesting because it's more in depth. The only downside to it is that it's kind of a smaller sample size unless you really, really work at it. So that's why a lot of times when you're doing stuff for grants or you're wanting to do things for reports, you'll have an overlap. I love observational data, and depending on what that nonprofit does, that could be really beneficial. Focus groups are something that I'm really familiar with. So when I was working around rural Texas, I did focus groups with survivors of domestic violence, and I was able to pick up different patterns of behaviors or different patterns of violence that I was seeing in specific areas. And the teams I worked with were then able to address those specific needs because rural areas have much different needs compared to urban areas or suburban areas. Any questions on data type? Moving right along. This is kind of just a quick overview. So quantitative, you say 85% of the participants completed the job training program. Qualitative, participants said the program was the most valuable because it built their confidence. And you use them both. It's really good to use them both. And I love that. I think it's a perfect balance because it gives you that concrete thing as well as it brings in something that's really important, which is the needs of the actual people in the community that are being helped. So another good example to kind of break it down and why you have to have them together, especially in a nonprofit setting, is so your after school program, you tracked the attendance, you saw it drop 30% in March. So what do you need to know and what don't you need to know and why do you need to find it out? So quantitative told you that the attendance dropped. So now you need to figure out why. And you can't solve the problem without knowing the why. So that's why it's important for them to have quantitative and qualitative data. And then this is one that I really enjoyed kind of like laying out because this is the one I'm the most familiar with. So you have these numbers. I made these all up. These are not from anywhere in particular. But if you combine this with now a qualitative as well, it helps you really see the actual impact of the numbers that were reported. Because if I just give you numbers, that's great. That's fantastic. But I want to see what that's doing in the community. I think it's really important that we're very clear about the direct impact in the community in a tangible way where such as survivors of violence can say, this helped me get through this time, or this is helping, protect this environmental space or this particular park. So let's talk about evaluating current data. So there's a lot of startups that's a little bit different because they don't have immediate data, and in my sweetest of dreams they just immediately jump in and start collecting it, and that's clearly not the case. um, but they're eventually going to run into the point where they're going to have just scattered data everywhere, and it is going to drive them crazy, and it's going to drive funders crazy, and it's going to be a whole thing. So the importance of it is funding, improving services, evidence-based practice and strategy, better reporting, easier reporting, because if you already have that data and you can just pull a report on it and plug it in there, it saves about 6 hours of you having to dig through really old spreadsheets that may or may not load. Then there's donor retention, improved staff training and retention, better grant narratives, and better ways of sharing what your organization is doing. So, like using those quotes from the domestic violence services example that I gave, you can put those in a report that you're giving. If you want to, if the survivor is comfortable with you sharing the quote, you can put it on your website, and that's how people can actually see what is going on in your agency. The gaps that I've seen in the particular places I've worked in, and this is across the board from criminal justice to animal welfare to any other volunteer work I did, some of the data was collected in odd ways. Like I've seen them collected in a Word document before, and I was perplexed by that, which it's fine, we got that fixed. Paper, paper is the one that haunts me the most. Does anyone know of an agency that's still keeping records on paper?
I know of a few.
Do they have any sort of plan to not have that on paper?
I think there are intentions. I think they don't know how or where, and it is not a priority because, I mean, things you've already said, low
Yeah.
staff, not enough time.
Yeah, which I do have solutions for that, which I'll get to in a minute, that are my personal favorite solutions because working nonprofit, I learned a lot of workarounds and how to not spend thousands of dollars on things and still be able to do the data analysis that I need to. Missing data is also a big one. Population's not covered. Like it's very tedious sometimes, so a lot of mistakes are made. There's typos, all sorts of things. The absolute like bare bone need for a nonprofit, we already talked about, the fundraising, and the grant stuff and kind of jumping into that and making sure everyone's funded. But you need to make sure you have a plan for program data. Staff data is really important. Volunteer data is really important. Marketing, I think that marketing comes into play at some point. They'll realize that they need marketing, but they don't really have a strategy from the start. But the program data is the one that they don't immediately think of unless it's related to the grant reporting. And program data is how you actually improve your services for the community. So your best starting point is you evaluate what you have. Even if you don't have something in place, you should at least look at what you have, kind of just an inventory or an audit. Do you track marketing? If not, do you want to? Do you have the ability to do that? So what does the back end of your website look like? Do you send out a newsletter? Is that something you're interested in? What does your program tracking look like for your organization? Because you at least have to have it for the grants. Well, depending on what the grant is. I'm thinking of like VAWA and VOCA grants, and those programs needed to be tracked. Do you get any data from social media campaigns? Do you do social media campaigns? So a best kind of like initial practice, especially for those startups, if you can get in there and be like, make a list of all of the things that you try to compile. Like, do you like the social media data, program data, list out everything that your grant needs and kind of branch out from there. It's like a little brainstorming thing. And it's going to be messy and sloppy and uncomfortable, but if you just have a list, now you have something to go off of, and you can build from there and say, okay, I want to track this for this purpose. And also at this stage, if you do have it, this is in reference to a couple places I've worked that kept things in spreadsheets. Um, the data started to need like it needed a little bit of cleaning. Like there were blanks or there were mistyped things. So as I was going through and making a list of like the different things that were happening, I would change a couple things. Like if someone's age was listed as 4,000 years old, I would change that to what was most likely 40. And just small things like that. Or if there was a blank, I would do some editing there to make sure if I did ever run the data through an analysis, it wasn't going to cause any issues. So organization is the next thing you kind of want to look at as far as being in charge of your data. So this really depends on the size of the agency. So your smaller ones, they can probably get away with like having spreadsheets like Google Sheets, Excel, numbers. I don't know anyone who uses numbers, but it's possible. A cloud-based storage would also probably be appropriate for a smaller size. And when I say smaller, I mean probably 10 to 30, definitely 50 and under, but I say once you get to the 40 mark, you got to start asking a little bit more questions. A lot of nonprofits that are bigger than 50, I see using Dropbox and spreadsheets, and they can mostly get away with it, but they're going to continue to grow, and I think that gets a little bit more complicated. Um, when you are going in and you're going to do that data cleaning, always make a backup of everything. Make a little archive folder, slap something in there, and keep that backup in there and make a copy that you work off of because we know computers sometimes quit. They just will give up, or something happens to the data and you make a mistake and now you've lost a big chunk of it. Always, always, always save the original in some component. And then you also have to get to the point where is it now time to think about getting an actual database, like a CRM or something that will manage your data and pull reports for you in a more significant way. So again, do not delete the original data. Please keep it stored. Every time I hear about someone losing data, ooh, how do we know it's time for a database? That's a great question. It really depends. So it's something that leadership needs to talk directly to the staff with. If they are scrambling to find things, if they're having to open 15 different Excel sheets to get something, if they can't find the contact information for a donor, if their mailing list is a disaster and they don't know how to update emails, they don't know how to get in contact with someone, and it's like chickens running around with their head chopped off type of energy, that's when you should start looking at doing something that's more direct than like a Dropbox with an Excel spreadsheet. So like for me, I'm not a nonprofit, but I am the one person running my business. I can operate just working off of OneDrive and an Excel sheet because I know where everything is. But if you have multiple people needing lots of things from the same client or same individual or same case, it is better to start moving towards an actual database. And I've seen databases that have been custom built. I've seen, there's case management ones. So if you're doing any work that has like HIPAA protected information, you'll go for something like case management software. One of the ones I work in a CRM that's really like customized to the monitoring service I provide. And I love that thing. It makes it really easy. I can message clients directly off of there. So it's really about the needs and the chaos going on. And a lot of databases also offer nonprofit prices. Um, I'll get a little bit more into that because I love talking about software options for data. Security policy, you do need one of these, especially if you are working with sensitive information. Please update your computer systems all of the time. The amount of times that someone has gotten hacked because they are 3 updates past what the recommendation, like what their computer needed, it haunts me. Back up your data. So I back up my personal data on an external drive, and then I keep other stuff backed up in a cloud drive, and I keep everything password protected. That's just a safety protocol, especially for if you're working with sensitive documents, like if it has someone's social security number, or to make sure you keep your finances protected. Common data quality issues, like I mentioned earlier, another big one I see is inconsistent formatting. And outliers are one that's going to become a problem when you start doing data analysis. Another benefit to like a software or a database is that you can just pull reports and it does it for you. And it also can check for things like duplicates. Duplicates are a big problem, and you can manually do those in Excel. It's not super hard to do. You can do them in like the more advanced analysis stuff like SPSS as well. But it's nice to have a database that's just like, nope, you can't have duplicates. Just go in and fix this one problem. Any questions? All right. So you have a couple different options. You've got your data management software, your customer relationship management. The one that I'm currently using is Monarch Solutions. I really like it. They're a little bit smaller. And then you've got Salesforce, which I know is a common one a lot of people use. Case management software. I've seen custom built ones. I've seen other not quite custom built ones, but they work in that particular way. If you're working with like criminal justice information, you need to follow like a CJIS policy. I believe something like AWS does has that already preset. So it would just be you'd have to do a little bit of research into what is required based on what nonprofit you're working with. And again, a lot of them, if not all of them, have nonprofit discounts. And to fully answer your question, do you need a CRM? This is kind of my little map for is it time? So it's what problem are you trying to solve? How many relationships are you managing? So I know in the CRM I work in, I'm talking to people who are being monitored, I'm talking to the custodial parent, and I'm talking to attorneys. In another setting, it could be you're talking to donors, you're talking to volunteers, and you're talking to staff through it. You also need to look at the budget, what your availability is for there. if you have the staff capacity and the staff willingness to actually implement it, because that is the biggest struggle, is actually implementing the software. Once you get it implemented and everyone's on board, it's great, fantastic. But getting people to migrate from something that they're so comfortable with, like an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet, is very, very difficult. Which is why I always encourage the new nonprofits to, if they can get into a CRM or get into some sort of database, that they should go ahead and try, if they have the funding for it. So this is my solution for kind of a transition, or if you're on paper, interns. I love interns. They are underutilized. Grad students always need something to put on their resume. Undergrad students, absolutely. Undergrad students have been a lifesaver because they will go in and they will organize that. Now they have this thing they can put on their resume to say, oh, I did this for this nonprofit, especially if it's a nonprofit that is aligned with what their future career goals are. So, for example, I had an intern one time who was interested in social work, and I had her do a lot of data entry for that particular project because it was related to what she was interested in, and it also helped her get some knowledge and hands-on experience with data, which she is going to eventually need. Again, backups, backups, backups of the initial raw data you pull, slap it in a folder every time. Typically, I have the folder that I'm doing the data analysis on, and then I have the data archive in there with the original data pull. And when I update the data, I typically will archive it up to a certain point just for, but that's me being super, super careful because sometimes you end up having like 15 or 16 spreadsheets and you have to go back to like the third or fourth one. But that's really more in-depth stuff that we'll get into when we talk about analysis. So those are kind of my management tips and tricks. Any questions? Is anyone asleep yet? Have I bored you? Totally understandable if that's happened. All right, now we're getting into the fun stuff, the collection. So we already talked a little bit about what kind of industry you guys are in. Um, so I'm gonna just skip that slide. So the basics to beginning like actual collection. What is your goal? So for example, I'm working in, advocacy. My goal is to make sure that there are, solid programs to help survivors of particular violence. Or if I'm working, since sex offenders are my specialty, I try to be, if anyone's uncomfortable with me talking about sex offenders, please let me know. I'm not going to talk about their crimes. I'm just going to reference them. But for example, if I want to set up a way to streamline them, or if I was a treatment provider and I want to set up a good program to provide pre-treatment education to them, that would be my goal. Well, I need data to back that up. What do I have already? Well, me in particular, you ever looked at sex offender research? It sucks. It is not good. So I would have to start kind of from scratch and go all the way into qualitative, direct interaction with someone who is, out on probation for a sex offense and do one-on-one interviews. Um, do you need to keep it in a system or do you need to keep it in a spreadsheet? That's a good way to start as well. So if you're starting from scratch, I would love for it to be in a system, but I understand if it's in a spreadsheet. And the best kind of bet to start is you get that core stuff. So if they're doing donors, name, email, phone number, where they work, how much they donated. That can be your very starting, like your very starting, your initial data set. And you can also build on that as you continue to grow your nonprofit. Or if you have some stuff that you don't know you want to keep anymore, back up the original file, but then have a working file that you removed. Like, say you had their fax number and you don't have a fax machine anymore. So you get rid of that. You also need to think about what reports you need. So, what your grant might require, what a funder might require, what a foundation grant might require, how much work you're going to have to do to pull that. Are you just giving them numbers that auto-populate? Because you can plug in some Excel formulas. Your quantitative stuff you have are like client served, program served, trainings provided, funders. So like one thing I keep track of is I provide a bunch of trainings like this one. Mainly it's on serial killers, sex offenders, and that sort of stuff. So this is kind of an interesting little break for me. But I keep a list of that. So I'm like, this is how long it is. This is what I did it for, just so I have that one on my CV and two, so I know what I can offer for trainings in the future. or if I want to apply for some sort of funding or whatever. And then qualitative is the most common qualitative I see in nonprofits is using surveys. And that's because they're both quantitative and qualitative, or targeted sampling. So if it's a nonprofit that's working specifically with or wants to work with rural, they'll do sampling about rural communities and whatever that focus is. Um, it's also good to talk to your staff. A lot of times, and I saw this when I was working in nonprofits, we would see, like when we were boots on the ground, we would see these patterns that you couldn't exactly have concrete proof of, but was something that might be worth tracking to see where it goes. And it could go nowhere, but it might also go somewhere. I see a raised hand.
Sorry, I was having trouble getting my mouse to click.
Oh, you're in.
On the qualitative surveys, I know that sometimes you can lead the data by asking the question the way you want it to be answered. Um, do you have any suggestions for how to get qualitative data that you can actually use that would actually drive your decisions in a more logical way than just driving your decisions the way you want them to go? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That all comes down to bias. It also really kind of depends on what your nonprofit is doing. So staying as neutral as possible, of course, is so I'm trying to give a concrete example because I want to make sure that I get this clear. So if I'm talking to sex offenders and I want to know what they did or didn't like about the program. Say I implemented a new training module and I want to see if they like that training module. I can put a question, an open-ended question. I can say, what did you like and what did you dislike about the entire training? So I'm not referring to the one module, but I can test to see if they are going to pick out that module and say, oh, I love this or oh, I hated this. And the risk you run with that is that they just might not say anything about it all. And now you've got no data to support that module, but you at least have asked a very open and honest question. So it's really about making sure you're not specifying exactly what you're looking for, because if you specify it or make a leading question, it's gonna it's gonna skew your data pretty badly.
Right. So the difficulty is in doing the analysis, which you're going to talk about in a little bit, but
Yeah.
do analysis of qualitative data is just a little harder, right?
It
Because it's open-ended questions.
Yes, but I have some strategies for you because I love
Okay,
qualitative data.
great.
And there's also another really handy tool is you can go out and you can find surveys that have been validated or like gone through and they've made sure that all of them are balanced. Um, and open-ended questions are, I think, a little bit better as far as trying to avoid leading questions. But really, as long as you're not trying to ask directly about the thing, I think it should be okay. But again, once we get to the analysis, we'll get more into that.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, moving right along. So, your organization's mission is also a starting point to what you should collect. So, can anybody tell me just a random mission of a nonprofit they've either worked for or one that they're working with now? Grants to teachers. Okay, that's a good one. So, you should probably focus on you're looking specifically to fund teachers, like fund their positions with grants. And Sandra, I see your hand is raised. Okay, funds programs. Got it. So for funding programs, it would have to be one of those things where you're collecting, okay, what does the program do? You're outlining what the program does, what they're hoping that the program does. If there's any kind of comparative data, have other schools tried it? What have the success rates been like there? And that can be kind of measured with, if you're wanting to pull quantitative data for that, you can do like a Likert scale. So like on a scale of 1 to 5, how much did you enjoy this? Or you can do a pre-test and a post-test after the particular program. Just really depends on what the program is. Sandra, I see your hand is raised, and yeah.
I've been working with quite a few nonprofits on and off my whole lifetime. But right now, I'm trying to figure out how do you get all these agencies that the wonderful state of Texas has, where other states just have a DNR? That means something else in Texas, Department of Natural Resources. I would like to see all these agencies be able to work together, because we have issues with PFOBs. We have issues with the processes that are currently in compliance with how we do things, but those compliances are so outdated. But how does that affect health? How does that affect the students? How can we get more collaboration together as a society, as we're building, and we're, because I love technology. A lot of the stuff you're talking about, way over my head, but I know you have to have data in order to proceed and have the best procedures and processes, and be able to have the best community you possibly can have for the residents and all the inhabitants that are in that area. And how do we become that pilot community here in East Williamson County that takes into consideration the health, the behavioral, the environmental, the students needing to learn? We have agencies. How can we bring those agencies together to help allow the students to shadow as we collect types of data? We're on limited funding, but can we share it across the agencies that will be able, so we have the same screenshot, the same
Yeah.
snapshot that we're all working on?
Sandra, thank you so much. That's a really great point. And there are a lot of different places that I think that are trying to mitigate that. We have lots of collaboratives that meet, and my community catalyst is also passionate about that. So you're certainly in a good place, and I'm happy to talk more about that with you anytime that you might be interested.
I also have some experience in getting agencies that don't naturally want to work together and getting them to work together. So, like when I was doing the rural work, I was getting law enforcement, prosecution, and advocacy to all work together. Bribing people with food initially is the best way to do it. Because if you don't have that initial like one-to-one connection and reaching out and doing basically a networking thing, it's going to be hard to share data because there's almost, depending on what the area is like, it can almost be like they feel like they're in competition. So getting together and slowly building that bond and then formalizing it in in the form of an MOU, so you understand like, okay, this is the information we're going to collect on our end. We'll share this with you, and then you share this information with us, and you can share it in the same system. You can, that's just however you would want to go about it. Um, and that would be how you kind of start where you're sharing. And then if you're each picking a piece, so say that you were working with like a behavioral health and uh something as far as like environmental, you two talk, you're going to share the data, you make that MOU, and then you move forward with that. But it's really it's actually just quite a bit of networking, which is really fun, and bribing people with food is always a good idea. Any other questions? Sandra, I hope
AJ,
that
Bob,
answered.
this is Bob Novello. I work with a lot of nonprofits, and one of the things, there's a real diversity here as far as what they're measuring and what it is that the funders and the grantors require. When I go talk to these people, the first thing I ask them is, okay, what kind of data are you tracking? It's counting. All they do is count. And so if it's a Boys and Girls Club, they're counting daily attendance. If it's Meals on Wheels, how many meals did we deliver? If it's a maternity home, it's how many women are we caring for? But then when I hear that what the funders and grantors want, they want to measure impact. The numbers don't mean anything. What we need to see is how does it impact? So now you're coming to testimonials and stories is kind of what they're looking for. So I find a real division between what it is that the nonprofits are tracking and what it is they should be tracking, I guess, if to get grant monies and to get impact, get donors who really are interested in helping that organization know what it is they're impacting. How are they impacting the community? That's the measurements that I'm having trouble figuring out. What do we measure to show impact?
So I have the perfect answer for that. That is that combination of qualitative and quantitative. Because for
Both.
a while it was because What the nonprofits are collecting, that's quantitative data. That is numbers. That's just, they're showing up, they're doing this. I can prove they're coming into my program, but it's not doing anything. Like they're not showing how helpful it is. So that's when
Mhm.
you do those things. You do a focus group. I don't know if you can do a focus group with children. That is not my area of expertise. Or you do a
Mhm.
focus group with people who are leading the various nonprofits. Or you do something like you can do a very short survey that is just asking them for a quote. You can do a one-on-one interview, and then you combine that with the impact numbers. So this number of people showed up. This number of people responded to the survey. These are comments from the survey about different things, and that can show the impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
And
Mhm.
that's like a very base one. When we get to, I love more of the narrative and interview or text or images. So like if there's, pictures of activities and you can see a bunch of people smiling, well, that's now you can see that you've made X amount of people smiling, and that's sort of a quantifiable thing, and that can go towards impact. Now, if you're looking at long-term impact, that can be a little different.
Mhm. Okay.
All right. Any more questions? This is so nice. I love getting questions. So here's another thing that you can do is you can kind of look at what data in similar organizations are doing in other areas outside of Texas. So like if a Texas nonprofit is providing services to crime victims, they can look at see what a nonprofit in Oregon is doing. So I have a lot of friends around the country who work in nonprofit, and they're like, "Oh, we do this, this, and this." And then I'm like, "Okay, I don't know if I can get the nonprofits here to do this, but that's good to know." That's just one of those options of something to keep in mind when you're looking at ways to start collecting data. And now the beautiful slide that I love. These are the types of data collection. The best data collection strategy uses both to tell the whole story. Because again, data is ultimately a story of this nonprofit and what they're doing for the community. So your quantitative, your numbers, your pre and post assessments, your surveys that are only things like, 5 out of 5 or 2 out of 5, whatever you want to rate the
Mhm.
training. Observation checklists or administrative data or secondary data. Then your qualitative stories, meanings, experiences, open-ended question, interviews, case notes. So if you're working with behavioral health and it's, you're in a position where you're able to review case notes and you can see the transformation of, when they first entered a program, these were the case notes, and over the time you can do a narrative analysis or a thematic analysis and see how the behaviors evolved while they were in a particular program. And that would be a qualitative method of analyzing that data. Or just observation, watching them and taking notes. I love observational data. That's what I do a lot of the time when I'm doing monitoring. It's observational data. I'm looking at the behaviors and interactions between a parent and a child and reporting that in my notes. Data you have and data you want to collect. We've gone over this. I always challenge people to go deeper. A lot of people suggest that you should just get the data that you just absolutely need, which, if you're overwhelmed, I get that that's a good starting point. I don't think it's ultimately very helpful because, like you were saying, nobody is on the same page about the data that's needed in order to get funding, to keep the program going, to know if the program is actually working. So go start prepping like you're about to do research, like you're wanting to do applied research, you're wanting to look into something. The more information you have, even if you just put it on the back burner, it's there. It's now documented. You don't have to do every single type of data collection, but it's worth introducing more things. So looking at more, individuals, talking to one or two individuals per cohort if you have one that does like a program that has a cohort. Like one woman in particular I know runs something for law enforcement where it's like a retreat and she'll do interviews at the end of it. And after, 6 or 7 cohorts, she'll compile that and look at all that data and see what themes she's seeing among law enforcement who attend that retreat. So you mix and match. You only collect the data you actually use, like I said, but I think you should collect more and put it on the back burner. I don't believe there is a thing as too much data. I refuse to believe it. People keep recommending that, and I'm like, absolutely not. I have a project I'm working on with serial killers, and my data set is massive because I want to know every little detail because it's a human and it's so complicated that there might be a confounding variable to why a certain crime is happening, or there might be something that I need to know about, and I'm just really nosy. So I want to know everything. And if you love data, you are also probably a little nosy, which is good. Um, Only if you can't access it or easily analyze it when you need it. Tech technically, but I mean, it's data can be. It depends on what you do with it. I think there's no such thing as too much. It's just really annoying if you aren't able to access it at all. That is the worst. Um, and as you're also starting to do these data collection methods at the beginning, um, start making notes about how you want to write that policy because it's going to suck if you have to come back in time and then write a policy and try to remember all of the ways you did because the initial data collection and organization, it's going to be messy, uncomfortable, and hard. So you can make little like I have sticky notes all over my desk. If you can do it like that. I like to also use project management software that's free called Asana. I'll just keep track of things. Um, so just start making that routine and start introducing it, especially to staff. So like at a small nonprofit, have the staff start picking up on different little data points so that they're involved as well. So this is kind of what an intake form would look like. This would be a quantitative data. How do you know you have enough data to make a decision? It depends on what the goal of your nonprofit is. So it sometimes you can find things by accident, but it for me in particular, like on the project I'm working on, my direct question is I want to look at the overlap between serial killers and domestic violence. So those are the points I'm looking at. But because of my knowledge that I have already pre-existing on serial killers, I add extra data points because I believe that there will be additional variables based on human behavior. Now, that could change based on what industry you're in, but you'll start to see patterns in general, if that makes sense. Um, so it really is just your goal. So this, like I said, intake forms, that's a way to have data. That's your demographic, your contact information, kind of that one-on-one. You can do intake forms for donors as well. As you can see, I typically stick towards like the advocacy type things. Services or training and education data collection. So, attendance tracking, pre and post test assessments, the duration, service. And it's really you're wanting to test if there's that increase in knowledge in the intended population. It's what you're wanting to measure or do with that training. So if I'm giving this training, I'm hoping somebody takes away at least one fun fact about data by the end of this. Or if you hate it, I also want to know that because then I know, okay, I need to change this to this. Or if the location for this is virtual and it works terribly, well, maybe I try it in person one time. So that's kind of, and I'm not making you guys take a post assessment after this, just to be clear. Uh, it's just kind of those different options you have for how you would collect data related to services, training, and education.
AJ, we have a post-event survey.
Oh, perfect. Never mind, you guys are taking a survey. Congratulations. Thank you for letting me know. I'm very excited. Marketing and engagement data. This helps you understand what's resonating with people who are donating and supporters. Identifying the best way to reach your audience. Is it website, email, text, social media, tracking brand awareness, measuring campaign success? So when you have those new nonprofits that are worried about funding and like getting their name out there, getting donations, it's good to start encouraging them to look at marketing data. I hate marketing. That is like my least favorite thing to do. I don't know what it is about marketing. I've never been good at it. The CRM that I use for the monitoring job that I work, it does marketing stuff on its own and it's all fancy and you can do text campaigns and all that sort of stuff. So if you have a nonprofit that's looking into wanting to do marketing and they're ready to do a CRM or something like that, um, a lot of people use MailChimp. I don't like MailChimp because it ends up in junk mail a lot. Using a CRM will make sure that those emails or those campaigns don't immediately go to people's spam. So doing that sort of research to see what kind of reports they can pull from a CRM and how they want to track that sort of marketing and engagement data, because that's going to connect them with their donors. And then the focus group that I kind of mentioned, I love focus groups. I think they're very helpful. It helps you understand the dynamics of the local community and you get a lot of different perspectives. And it's a good way to figure out where to shift resources. So, like, you could argue this particular training is a focus group, and you could say, okay, well, we need more focus on this particular aspect. We need more focus on collaboration between agencies. Okay, now we've got that. Where do we go with that knowledge? That's now a data point, and that's an important data point. Are other people in the community feeling the same way? How many people in the focus group agree with that? And then that's now qualitative data. That is like the starting of an impact. And then stories, the client journey from, the current state they were in, any challenges they overcame, breakthrough moments, the impact that the services had on their life. Again, this might be just based on what area you're working in with a nonprofit, but I know for like survivors of violence, some of them are very comfortable saying this changed my life and I really enjoyed these services, and those end up being narratives in a grant. The one thing about this is be very, very clear with the individual about how the information is being used, be transparent about it, and get written consent. And then I'm not going to read through all of this, but this is that combination survey where you've got qualitative and quantitative. And this is how you get the numbers that the nonprofit keeps making, as well as the qualitative impact information that the grants now want, which is kind of crazy to me because when I was working on grant programs, they did not care at all about qualitative data. They only wanted quantitative data. And maybe that was just because I was on a VAWA grant and a VOCA grant. So I'd be curious to know what grants you guys have worked on before. Also, if you don't know, that's totally fine. They all have the little short things. And then how to choose a best collection method. These are, you know, this is kind of just a cheat sheet that I really liked. And I'm like, okay, here you go. And my last point on there is reach out to a data nerd if you need help, and do nonprofits so you can like work with other nonprofits. That's a really good idea. But it's things like, what is the question you're asking? Okay, you're asking how many, how much, you're doing surveys, logs, tracking. Did it work? Pre and post assessments. If you're looking at resources on a limited budget, you can use something like Google Forms. If there's a specific population you're working with and they're, busy or hard to reach, you do multiple channels, you come up with incentives. What's the purpose? Funder reporting, you do standardized outcome in a survey, program improvement, you do that mix. Advocacy and storytelling, you do testimonials and photos and voice and videos. And then understanding community needs is my personal favorite. So it's like community surveys, interviews, and focus groups. And best practices. Always make sure that you're protecting anyone you're working with. So informed consent and de-identifying the data. People need to know what you're doing with their data. And in some cases, you can anonymize it. You can have anonymous surveys. Keep things short. Surveys that are really, really long, a lot of people don't want to do them, and then you have no data. Another key thing is also pay attention to people who are not answering your surveys, because that's going to tell you something. There might be, if you have the data and you know the person's name and their job and their basic demographics, and you send them, 3 surveys over the course of 2 years and they never even open it. That tells you something about that particular person. And if you see that sort of pattern across the board in different areas, it might be okay, well, that type of individual, say that they work in commercial real estate. You have 4 or 5 different people who have never opened a survey from commercial real estate. Maybe that's not somewhere you need to be focusing your resources. Maybe you direct that elsewhere. Um, Standardize the data collection process. Start small as well. You don't need to have everything overnight. I daydream about having everything overnight, but that's not realistic despite my best efforts. Um, and don't ignore your data for like forever. You can always eventually find something to do with it. It will matter in some capacity. Maybe it won't be a huge deal, but it will matter at some point. At least that is my personal opinion and what I've seen in all of my experience looking at data. And the consequences, loss of funding. wasting resources, less effective at work, losing credibility, missed opportunities, and potentially harms future research. That's my personal, well, I don't like any of them, but specifically when I'm working with criminal justice data and the initial data is really bad, when I am pulling that data to put into research and do analysis on it, I now have like a flawed analysis because my data was not good. Your research and that growth is only as good as your data is. All right, any questions before we get into data analysis? Yes.
So, do you have a suggestion for if using a smaller focus group would help you, that you would then expand it to a survey to a bigger audience? Would having a focus group first help kind of develop the survey in a more positive way so that you would know the best questions to ask?
Yes, that would be ideal, specifically from the population or community you're looking at wanting to survey. That is a great idea. Any other questions? All right, now we're getting into data analysis. I'm very excited. I love data analysis, and that's the process of examining, cleaning, transforming, and interpreting data to discover useful information. Raw numbers become insights. You can identify patterns, improve services, prove impact, make informed decisions. And the value of data analysis, oh my gosh, it's endless. You guys are data nerds. You know it's endless. It's wonderful. Are clients being served after services? Which programs are the strongest? Where are people getting stuck? You can demonstrate, outcomes and impact and strengthen applications and build credibility. And a good analysis can help you reuse the same data across multiple grants so that you're not having to depending on how many grants the nonprofit's looking at, you're able to use the same information across the board and reduce that load on staff. And a couple other things that's just helpful for. I just like it. I'm really very much pro data analysis. Um, So this is kind of the process we are going through. I've been guiding you gently through the full data analysis process. We've talked about asking questions in the beginning, collecting the data, cleaning and organizing it, handling any missing data, standardizing things. Now we're looking for patterns. I say calculating statistics. I did not put the math in here because that was not fair to any of us, and I didn't want to put the math in here. I have a little bit of stuff defining like the very basic stuff. But nothing too in deep, unless you really want to go there, and I can pull out SPSS at any point in time. So this is analyzing quantitative data. Frequency is the one that I see used most. So that's, that a certain percent of the population was this, and the frequency of like 247 clients served, and this was the average age. Um, the middle value. So in some cases, you're not always going to want to use average. So if you have like a crazy outlier on your data, so for example, you have, I'm trying to think of a good example. You're looking at the income of individuals staying in this particular sex offender treatment program. And all of them roughly make, anywhere from $10,000 a year to $80,000 a year. And then all of a sudden, there's this one guy who makes like $3 million. That's gonna mess with your data, and you might want to look at looking at the like the median value or the mode, because that's just a really odd outlier to have, and it's not representative of the whole sample that you're looking at. So trends over time, are there season patterns? One really interesting piece of data that was collected in the domestic violence world is they found that during holidays and sports, like big sports events, domestic violence will increase on those particular days. So that's really interesting. We'll get to the correlation does not equal causation because causation is much harder to prove and is very, very in-depth. Comparison between groups. Are there different outcomes based on age, location, program type? And then the relationship between variables. So do they appear to be related to one another? So that's where you look at correlation. Okay, these two things are going up at the same time. That's interesting. They might be related to each other, but then you need to do more digging to see if that's really what's happening or if you need to look at a confounding variable that might be influencing both things. Qualitative data, this is way more fun. So one version of qualitative analyzing qualitative data is thematic analysis, and that's you're reviewing reports, surveys, notes, or whatever your focus might be. So when I'm doing my project on serial killers in particular, I'm looking at law enforcement reports, I'm looking at news articles, I'm looking at secondary sources that I can get a hold of as well. One day they'll give me primary sources, but it's harder for some of the older serial killers. And I'm picking out, particular themes that I'm seeing. Okay, does he have a history of saying cruel things to his partner? Has he been through a divorce? And I say he because that's the primary, my primary sample is men. Um, so that would be identifying recurring themes. And then you group similar things together. So another way you can do thematic analysis is if you're looking at reports or surveys for an education program, and a bunch of the surveys say, the program is too short. You now have this thematic analysis of its reporting, oh, maybe we make this longer because a lot of people are saying they didn't have enough time listening. Um, the example at the bottom there is in 50 exit surveys, group therapy was mentioned 27 times, financial struggles 28 times, transportation 42 times. So now you've got frequencies and you can say, okay, the primary need in the exit surveys of this group had to do with transportation because 42 out of the 50 exit surveys mentioned transportation. So that's your analysis there, and now you can address what is the transportation need that this community actually needs. Which, by the way, the transportation thing was a big issue in rural communities. That was probably one of the number one things mentioned. Any questions? All right, moving right along. So content analysis. This is actually really interesting because you're categorizing the data and you're seeing you're coding them into categories. I see this in like behavioral threat assessments. So they'll look at like text and social media and how many times did they say this word and how many times did they say this word, and you just like you count up or do the frequencies for how many times they said specific words, or and not things like and or but like something that is salient and that stands out. And then narrative analysis, you examine individual stories, you look at how people describe their experiences, and you identify key moments. It's got context, it's complex, and qualitative data is really, really in depth. So it does tend to take a little bit more time than just pulling numbers and checking along, but it is, in my opinion, more valuable. I'm not biased or anything, but I think it's more valuable. And then segmentation is also something you do in analysis. So if you want to look at subgroups such as, age, gender, race, ethnicity, income level, you'll break it up by different areas. So like urban versus rural. If I want to look at something in a program that's happening in an urban area versus a rural, which one is it more successful in? Or like a first-time client versus a returning client. How is that program going for them? You can do it by time, you can do it by engagement level, and that just breaks it up a little bit more so you have a better comparison. I apologize if my cat gets on camera. She only does this when I have trainings, and if I lock her out, she will scratch up my carpet, and I don't want her to do that. So, and she's my little executive assistant. You can also compare your data to external benchmarks, like I was mentioning earlier. Um, so you can compare to your own past performance. You can compare to industry standards. So like in domestic violence communities, Minnesota has had a bunch of great programs for domestic violence. So comparing to some stuff they have up there, similar nonprofits in your area. I do know that sometimes nonprofits can butt heads because they feel like they're competing for the same funding, which is a lot of times why collaboration is difficult. And you have to learn to navigate that particular aspect to be like, hey, I'm not a threat, but we should work together because why invent the wheel if we both have components that can help us both be successful and do good things for the community. And then, of course, look at the top performers in your field and compare what you're doing to that. And then also what your grants require. Tools for analysis. Excel and Google Sheets are a great starting one. Are you guys familiar with, oh, hang on, we got a question. All right. What are your thoughts on using someone else's data for reporting? For example, a nonprofit provides education to schools. They did not collect data. Now the grant is asking for demographic data of students served. The organization collected demographic data from the school districts they serve and reported that, even though not all students participated in the education program. So the so the nonprofit provides the education to the schools. They didn't collect the data, but they just pulled the demographic data from the school districts to use that. I
Yeah,
think that's I think that's technically fine. I think that's allowed. Do I like it? Not particularly because it's not accurate representation of the program. I don't think it's nefarious. I think it's probably they don't have the time or energy to actually collect the data, whereas it would be a more accurate representation for them to collect it. Sandra.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like we can't afford for everybody, all these agencies, like you get a data, you get a data. We can work together and find the best data compiled through multiple agencies in order to move better as a community, especially out here in East Williamson County when it comes to education and student readiness for the careers that will be ahead of them, as well as for the environment in the city and the health of the area.
Yeah. Yeah, and I I'm fine with other data being used, but if they're specifically analyzing like the outcomes of a program, they do probably need to be able to mark which students did the program, but maybe they just wanted it depends on what the ask was. So, and it also depends on if they got permission or if they just stole the data, which it doesn't sound like they stole the data. So, that's very dependent. I don't think the data is as good if it's not marked specifically, but I don't think it's the worst sin I've ever seen committed. Did that answer your question?
that does. Thank you. This is a
Okay.
real life scenario. I get a lot of, I have a lot of conversations with nonprofits, and I learn lots of interesting things. And this one has stuck around in my head because it bothered me, and I was like, it's not technically like illegal, but it feels
Yeah. It,
gray. So I was just
yes.
curious.
Yeah, it's allowed, but it's disappointing. That's what I would call it.
Okay.
Maybe frame it as out of 20,000 students, we served 5,000. Of those 5,000, these were the outcomes. That that could work. It's still not specifically measuring the program outcomes, but it is at least talking more about the outcomes and refocusing it to the outcomes. So that would be a good way to write it in the report. Um, do you guys know Excel formulas? Because these are like the only four I use in Excel. I highly recommend them. They take pretty much no time to learn and they're very quick and easy. I think you can also do you can pull like quick pivot tables or charts that you might need from Excel or Google Sheets. This is good for your really small ones who are not running huge reports yet. But if you really want to get into data analytics, who is familiar with SPSS? I know it's mainly for social, uh, more social sciences, but I love SPSS and it's my baby.
I also
Uh,
love SPSS.
what was that?
I also love SPSS, but my
Yes,
background's psychology research. So
yes. Did you know about PSPP? I love PSPP.
I
Um,
just discovered that, and it is, yes, incredibly interesting.
Bob, did you have a question?
No, no, I'm just the more you're talking, the more I'm thinking about pivot tables. Pivot tables are make Excel a nice data management system.
Y
It's nothing more than rows and columns without the pivot tables. A pivot table, that one class I went to, boy, I really was impressed with how you can use pivot tables to do data analysis with Excel.
Right? I actually did not know that Excel could do pivot tables until like I was out of college because I used SPSS all the time. And Excel, like I could use it basically, but then someone showed me pivot tables in there and I was like, oh, this is a game changer if you don't have SPSS.
It
Um,
really is. And the formulas, though, that I just knew about the formulas, and that's not very much, but it's something. But boy, when you look at pivot tables, that opened up a whole new horizon for data analysis in Excel.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
So Excel is still great. Like it's still a really good program, especially because most people know how to use it at least in some
Right.
capacity, and you can teach them pivot tables, and you're good to go. So,
That's
um,
exactly right. It's a comfort level to begin with, as
yeah.
opposed to a brand new piece of software. How do you do this SPSS or PSPAP or whatever? I mean, these are, I'm sure, great, but boy, it's nice when you know Excel and you learn how to use pivot tables. It's just really phenomenal.
Oh yeah. And buy-in's much easier if they already know how to use the rest of the software or the rest of the program.
Mhm.
I love SPSS though because you can do a lot with SPSS. That's
Okay.
primarily when I'm running data analysis for my research, when I was
Mhm.
doing it for TDCJ. SPSS is very expensive. So there's
Mm.
this great open source program called PSPP, which is just SPSS in free font. You download it. It operates very similar to SPSS.
Mhm.
They also come like you can get a manual and watch a video. Once you learn how to do it, it's pretty intuitive, and you can convert Excel files into PSPP and run analysis, and it just does more in-depth things. Yes, Michelle.
What do you think about using AI for analysis, both quantitative and qualitative?
I'm so glad you asked. I have that slide coming up in a
Okay,
little bit.
sorry to jump ahead on you.
That's a great question because I
It's a good question.
that's a very good question. I do have thoughts about that
Okay,
because I
I'll let
have
you have those shots.
yeah, I've been running some tests with that. Any other questions? So PSPP is free and it does the more advanced stuff that you might want to do the further you get into analysis. If you're a baby nonprofit, maybe not yet. If you haven't organized the data yet, probably not time to be trying to introduce them to PSPP. The one thing is don't save like your data exclusively in PSPP. Keep a backup of it in Excel to make sure everything operates well and just so that yeah, that you don't lose anything. But that's more me. I'm always cautious. Double save everything. So some major mistakes are correlation does not equal causation. You can say that there looks like there is a relationship, but you have to do further testing, such as uh like a t-test where you're testing multiple things, or cherry picking data. I don't love when people cherry pick data, and I see that happen a lot. It's not very transparent, and then we're not getting accurate representation of what we're looking at. Ignoring sample size. If you have a 100% success rate, but you have two people in the program, congrats on your 100% success rate, but we should probably talk about getting more people in the program in general. And then that basically goes into analyzing something without the context. Your analysis is only as good as your data. So the main ones for nonprofits to focus on, and again, happy to send you these because these are just your little cheat sheets of this is what you want to look at, who are we serving, are we reaching the target population, the services and programs, and what your best option is as far as like getting and showing that information and analyzing it. So descriptive analysis is the one I see most often. Trend analysis, changes over time. You would use something like a line chart. I'll talk about data visualization in a moment. Comparative analysis, so you're comparing different groups or programs. That's where you look at do the outcomes differ by age, gender, or race. This is where you get into a little bit more in-depth type of things. Gap analysis, so finding the difference between like what you're missing, what's being left out. So your comparison charts, map showing where needs are not being met. Root cause analysis, qualitative data. This is where you're talking to individuals and you're like, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? On a scale of 1 to 10, that's where you do your thematic coding. You look at your case notes, interview transcripts, open-ended survey responses, unstructured, well, in my case, I would do like a semi-structured interview, but an unstructured interview, just letting a person talk and picking up the information from that. What are barriers that people continuously report, like when I was talking about transportation? And then outcome evaluation and analysis. This is your proof of impact. So like your follow-up surveys, your, percentage change calculation, which I can never explain the definition of that off the top of my head, but I know how to put the numbers in the little web page that I saved because there's a special formula for it. Um, and if you can compare to a control group, great. That doesn't really happen often in nonprofits, but if I'm wrong, please let me know because I want to know who's got access to a control group. Um, and then your pre and post comparisons. And then also looking at your analysis for finances and marketing and engagement. This is just looking at frequency from donors. Are they donating yearly? Are they donating monthly? Are those marketing campaigns successful? All that jazz. Data visualization, this is how you present it to like a board, or if you're doing a training on it, something that's really easy to just show, like an infographic. a map diagram so you can label like this particular area is not getting the services that they need, whereas this one over here is getting more, and we're exploring why that is the case. And some options you can do for that. Tableau is one that is like a really intense one. You can do some stuff with SPSS as far as visualization. I've never used Google Data Studio, but it seems to be an up and coming visualization. I don't do a ton of visualization work. And if I do, it's in SPSS or I will just figure out something in Excel. And so, one thing that you guys might be interested in is the concept of applied research. So that's where you find someone, their specialty is research. You can partner with a university, an independent research company. And if there's something you specifically want to look at, they can bring in their extensive research knowledge and improve the process to or create practical solutions to something that you're looking at. So it's basically like a research consultant, if that makes sense. Do any of you guys do anything like that? Well, it's really fun. I loved applied research. Sometimes people will call me and be like, "Hey, I need to know, how often I'm getting this, and this done." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Let me just plug that in." It's just fun. It's a quick like little fun thing, and it helps out nonprofits quite a bit. And now, AI warning for data analysis. So, as a good researcher and as someone who loves data, I have used ChatGPT, Claude, and I think I tried one other one because I was looking at information it could pull. I'm working on a project because obviously I'm talking about serial killers, I talk about sadism, and I'm teaching that to a group of people. I'm creating a course for them. And so I want to see how accurate that information is. I have my master's, this is what I've studied. I've talked to people in the community. I've read probably all of the research papers, done on all my own research. I want to see what these can come up with. So one, it just doesn't, sometimes it doesn't want to pull the information because it says it's inappropriate, which, okay, that's fine. If you don't want to tell me about that serial killer or that incident, okay. It will give me incorrect information in general. And I don't trust it enough with numbers. So if I were to take an Excel sheet, and I haven't tried this with Claude, but I did try it with ChatGPT. I was testing an Excel sheet and just wanted to see what it would do. And it just didn't do any, it didn't load, it didn't run anything. When I tried to pull references for any reports that it would pull from the internet, it gave me the wrong references. They didn't link to the right spot. On top of that, it can hallucinate. The best way I can compare the way AI is operating now, on top of it not being secure. So depending on the data you're working with, you don't want to use it. But it can hallucinate and it will give you the wrong thing. And now your data's messed up because it's messed something up entirely. Or it will put things in the wrong column or the wrong spot. And it's just like, the first generation of like an iPhone where it worked and it was cool, but it didn't really work super well initially, and then it slowly got better over time. Or like, think of the current version of AI as like dial-up internet while somebody else is on the phone. That's the best way I can describe how it handles data right now. I would not trust it. It's really good if you need to organize your thoughts. So, like, if you are like, oh, I need to remember to do this, you can put it in there and you can say, what was I going to do with this piece of data? And it should theoretically spit that back out at you. Spit that back out at you. It's missed it one or two times with me, but most of the time it gets it. Any questions?
I've also used AI to help me figure out like what kind of formula do I need to use if like this is what I'm looking at and I have, this kind of information, what would I put in a formula or would this be best in this certain kind of program? It's been helpful in that context.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. I might try that one because I haven't asked it for any formulas. I've mainly had it just look at like data I threw at it.
AJ, for the other systems you mentioned, that SPSS or whatever those other things were, how secure is your data for that?
So SPSS is pretty secure. The state of Texas uses it for its research, so I know that they have that unlocked. Really, the security goes to how well your internet is secure and how well your computer is secure. I'm a bit of a cybersecurity nerd, so like I know which VPN to use. I know when like who has access to where I'm using SPSS. If I'm out in public working on my computer, I only connect to my hotspot that's not connected to Wi-Fi, so I can't, no one can get in the back door that way. So it's more about if your actual system is safe rather than SPSS itself.
Okay.
Because it works like an application like Adobe.
Hmm. Okay.
And PSPP is open source, so you just have to keep updating it, but it's the same sort of thing.
All right.
Any other questions? So this is a really important one. Staff is really important. Staff on the ground, like the boots on the ground people who are working in the trenches of the nonprofit, they are well aware of what data needs to be collected, or they have opinions on what needs to get collected. Maybe it doesn't need to be collected, but I always like to listen to them because they are in the trenches. And if they are also involved in how to get the data collection implemented, they're gonna be more likely to have buy-in. I'm gonna go a little faster. Hmm. Excuse me, through this part because we are running out of time. But again, I will send this over and have my community catalyst mail it out to you guys, however you want to do that. Your key points, what is stored, how is it stored, who has access to it, how long is it kept, security measures in place, and protocol for access and access removal. Those are kind of just some key points. So collaborate with your entire team on this. Start small, keep it clean, implement, start by how you want to collect your data. You want to start in Excel? Great. You want to start looking at CRM? Great. Make sure you're always considering the ethics, informed consent, and confidentiality. I like to make a cheat sheet for data entry for people if they're like want to remember stuff in Excel, especially if they want to do a little bit of data analysis, or a cheat sheet for like how things get entered. And just stick that somewhere in a universal folder everyone can access, or anyone who will be doing data collection. And then this is implementation for analysis. You start small. This is always the best option. You start small and then you build it up from there once you've built the habits and the comfortability. And then you start making it a routine and you keep going and going and going. Attend free webinars on nonprofit data, partner with universities, use free resources. There's a ton of free resources out there. And there's a ton that are just trying to sell you stuff. It's a really interesting dynamic as far as like data and nonprofits and working through that whole thing. But I definitely would encourage you to explore and see what you can find out there. And then this is just the importance. It's accountability, it's learning, it's reaching the community, it's communication, efficiency, long-term viability, motivation and focus, risk management, and building a better future because data is fundamental for learning more about an industry and making that industry better. And any questions plus my contact. I can't believe I did that in an hour. That was I expected to be rushing much faster at the end. Oh, and this is my contact information. If you are a cybersecurity person, I do have Proton Mail, which is the safest as far as mail goes. And then that's my website and my consulting email.
AJ, thank you so much for being here, and for
Yeah.
answering all of our questions. And yes, Sandra, we will share the recording as well as the slides for anybody who wasn't able to watch the whole thing or just would like to go back through. This was a lot of information that I found really helpful, and as well as fascinating. So we want to make sure everyone has access.
Hey, thank you guys so much for
Yeah.
having me. This was delightful. I loved getting all the questions. This was a very like interactive group, and I'm like, yes, yay, questions, nerd questions.